if they pop in a few minutes late. And we are recording this for our YouTube channel. So I'm Margaret Steinbugler. I'm on the North Fork Audubon Board, and I'm the Program Committee Chair. And I welcome you all here tonight to hear a great presentation that we have run through previously in a dress rehearsal, where Andy's going to talk about all these early arriving invasives, and we're going to learn a lot about them. Andy worked for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Long Island for I had to do the math here, but 37 years, from 1985 to 2022 when he retired. He has both a master's and PhD in the field of weed science in horticultural crops, and I did major research in developing weed management strategies for commercial crop production, for landscape, and for turf. So he used what they call IPM, integrated pest management approach, including the combinations of herbicide, biological, and cultural means of managing weeds. Since retiring in 2022, he's continued to do some consulting, and those of you who are familiar with Inlet Pond County Park will know that he was very instrumental in helping to establish the native grassland garden at the park. And he's been on the North Fork Board of Directors, North Fork Audubon Board of Directors since 2024. And with that, I am going to go back to sharing my screen in slideshow view. And I'm on the first slide, so I'm going to hand it over to, before I hand it over to Andy, a few words about questions. You can hold your questions to the end, or you may type them into the chat as Andy's giving his talk, but he won't be answering questions until we get to the end. So with that, Andy, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. I apologize to everybody for the delay in presenting this. It was just unavoidable technical glitches that we couldn't overcome. But in the meantime, the weeds certainly didn't wait for us, and lots of the ones that I'm talking about tonight are already up, and you probably have already noticed them. So tonight, next slide, please. I'm going to talk about some early emerging invasive plants or weeds. What makes them invasive is the following: not native to an area. They grow rapidly. They have high reproductive rate, ability to disperse widely, usually by either seeds or vegetative fragments or both. And there's a lack of natural controls on the growth and reproduction, which usually is found where the plants are native, in the lands that the plants are native to. But when they move to new areas, those natural controls usually don't follow. So tonight we're talking about 4 of these early emergers. Next. All of these emerge usually by mid-March is when I start looking for early mugwort. And one of the problems with these weeds is that they're not selected by local wildlife as food. But the seeds and fruit are often moved around by local wildlife and by wind and natural forces. And they're all listed as highly invasive in New York State and are prohibited, which means they can't be possessed with the intent to sell, purchase, or introduce, which is, and these along with 62 other species are outlined and presented in pictorial form in this, next please, in this brochure that's available free of charge from New York State at this website. I worked on one of the committees that evaluated these species, and this brochure came out 12 years ago, and we are now there. I'm not involved but anymore, but the committee that is doing it is now close to releasing the new species that are going to be added, and I just imagine that there's probably double the number that we have to worry about. So the first weed I'll talk about today is a mile-a-minute weed, Persicaria perfoliata, formerly known as Polygonum perfoliatum. Next. We don't have too many instances of where we can actually pinpoint the exact location of where an invasive species was introduced, but we do in this case. And it was inadvertently brought to a nursery in southeastern Pennsylvania back in the 30s and 40s. And this nurseryman was a bit of an amateur botanist, and he liked the look of this plant, so he didn't control it very well. And after he passed away, his daughter abandoned the nursery, and the weed just took off from there. And since then, it's been found in 12 of the northeast, pretty much all of the northeastern states now, mid-Atlantic and northeastern. One of the main problems that we have with it is that it has been spread widely by Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. Next, please. This happened in two ways. The ripe berries float; they're buoyant, and so they were brought in largely from Pennsylvania and New Jersey and spread. We already had it on Long Island, but it even spread more after that. And the damage that was done by the wind and the wind of the hurricane created these new sites for the weeds to get established. It's a very unusual weed in that the look of it it's not like many other plants that you'll come across. The fruit is this attractive blue fruit that matures in the middle of the fall. And as I said, those little fruits are highly desired by migrating birds, and they will eat them. They'll eat them all, or the deer also will eat them. And then the petioles of each of the leaves have this structure called an ochrea, and that's very distinctive and easy to tell. And plus, the leaves are also very distinctive. They're equilateral triangles, and another name for this is tear thumb. And as you can see from those downward pointing prickles on the stems and the petioles, that if you were to grab that and try to pull it out, you would see that the name is very well justified. Next. So this is a picture taken at a site in Sag Harbor where the Hurricane Sandy breached this area, and lots of seed, unbeknownst to us or to the landowner at the time, brought in all this mile-a-minute seed. And so this was 2 seasons later, and you can there was no known mile-a-minute in this 2 years before this, and you can see how it covers the whole area completely. So also the way that mile-a-minute grows allows it to be such a very fast invader. And here you see how wild grape grows. It has these tendrils that attach to whatever the substrate, the stem of another plant, and those have to be well anchored in order for the stem to continue to grow. Whereas with the mile-a-minute, it has no tendrils. It just has those downward prickles. And so whatever is in its way as it's growing up, usually it will attach to it either securely or somewhat securely. And so it doesn't waste any energy in developing tendrils, or that might slow it down. So that's one of its superpowers, I think. Also, in the springtime, the seedlings can germinate in a variety of places. You see in this slide where they're coming up out of pure sand. This picture was taken at the beach at Orient State Park, But they can also germinate in deep shade as well, which is a characteristic of many invasives, a wide variety of plant ability to germinate in a lot of different environments. Dispersal is the major vector is birds, but also deer will eat the berries and but not digest the seed. Next. The one good thing, well, there's a couple of good things about this plant. One is that it's an annual, and so it's not a perennial like bittersweet or honeysuckle. So we don't have that aspect of it to deal with. And then the other is that the seed generally doesn't live very long in the seed bank. After the third year, you can see from this figure there, the viability of the seed is greatly reduced. And so if we can figure out ways to manage the plant, keep it from producing seed for 1 or 2 seasons, we might be able to, significantly impact the ability of this plant to infest areas. So we have 3 different management options. One is concentrated and focused hand pulling. Again, it's an annual plant. The vines are very shallowly rooted, and if you're wearing gloves, they can be easily pulled out and quickly cover a large area. So this is a viable option for this weed. Biocontrol, I'll talk about this a little bit in a minute. And the third is chemical control. Next, please. So there are some non-selective herbicides that are registered for managing this weed, but the places where this weed grows are generally not conducive to herbicide applications, at least on the North Fork. And so that option really isn't pertainable here. Next, please.
Oops.
Oh.
There we go.
Okay, I'll talk briefly about the mile-a-minute weevil. This was collected by Dr. Judy Huff Goldstein at University of Delaware in late 90s, and it was vetted and put through rigorous testing, and it was eventually released as a biological control in around 2009, I believe it was. Next, please. It shows all the characteristics of desirable biocontrol agents in that they have high reproductive rates. Once you release them, they will reproduce rapidly during the season, and they also overwinter, so they don't have to be re-released. They have extreme host specificity, and also they have good dispersal capabilities as well. And they can suppress the target weed. But therein lies the big question. So this is what the weevils look like. This video was taken when we released some back in 2012. And the weevils these are all adults. They're very active. They tend not to fly very much, even though they're capable of it. And then this cup would be released at the base of a plant, and then the weevils would quickly crawl up the stem and start eating. Here's an example of a success story in New Jersey. Over the course of 3 years, you can see that the infestation was greatly reduced. It went from 290 to 31 plants per square meter. And this is what the bottom slide is what the plants look like after the weevils were through with it. They had pretty much stripped most of it of all of its vitality. So when we started doing releases early on, it was still a pilot project, and we were able to obtain weevils without cost. And because of that, we released at a few sites in high concentrations, at 1,500 to 2,500 in each location. And where we did that, we were able to see this level of injury on the right slide there. Next. Unfortunately, this pilot project was short-lived, and after that, the lab had to start charging. And because of that, the number of weevils that can be released at each site had to be reduced because otherwise it's too costly. And that, I think, is largely responsible for not allowing us to really get a good result with this weevil. So the weevil is widely distributed at this point all over Long Island, but just not in high enough concentration to do the kind of damage that we want it to do. So that leaves us with hand pulling, and that's what I want to talk about next. Next, please. So we started a project last year at the Inlet Pond Park, where we had 4 areas that we had identified in the dormant season that had been heavily infested with mile-a-minute, and we mapped them out with wooden stakes, each of the plots in those 4 reps. Next, please. And you can see that by April 15th, we had already significant number of new seedlings had come up. Next, please. So we had 5 treatments in each of the reps. The treatments were established to determine how many hand weedings would be needed to efficiently remove mile-a-minute in the first part of the season. At 3-week intervals in treatment 1, each of those, the plot in treatment 1 was hand weeded every 3 weeks for 9 intervals, I'm sorry. And then the other treatments were weeded as indicated. And once the mile-a-minute plants were counted, they were removed from the plots, and the other plant species that were growing in those plots were counted but not removed. So here, next, you can see on the left 2 pictures, the seedlings and young plants that I removed at the first weeding. They were plentiful and still, already growing very well. But by the end of the season, the actually mile-a-minute plants that you're looking at they're kind of brownish because they've already started to die back. And the rest of the green plants are the resident plants that were there, not mile-a-minute. Next, please. So these are the results of the treatments and the number of weeds, the average of over 4 reps taken. So the plots that were weeded every 3 weeks, we had most of our seedlings were taken out in the first weeding, the first 2 or 3 weedings. And then after that, there were few, if any, through the rest of the season. And then the treatment 2, where we weeded it only once in mid-June, that yielded average of 52 plants per plot, and then only 1 at the end of the season. Treatment 3 we did twice in May and early July. Again, early May yielded the most of those 2. And then treatment 4, we had 3 timings where most of the plants were taken out before in the first or late May timing. And then on the bottom one, you see not weeded until the end of the season. And there we see only 6 plants averaged. And you might wonder what that's all about. Next, please. Okay, thanks. So it's common in annual weeds or weedy type plants or plants that have weedy growth. It's common for many seedlings to emerge in the spring. Next. In conditions where resources are limiting, such as light or water or nutrients, usually self-thinning within this population occurs. Essentially, this means that the weaker or smaller or later emerging individuals are literally weeded out. And the hardiest individuals, pardon their spelling, can produce viable seed for the next generation. So that was why we saw so few in that plot that hadn't had any weeding at all by the end of the season. So the lessons that we learned, the majority of the germination occurred from early May until mid-July. The results from treatments 2 to 4 show that if hand weeding occurs during that period, then very few, if any, seedlings emerge after that. And even though there is significant self-thinning in the population, leaving those survivors to the end that's not a viable strategy to just leave the plants. We're just trying. Next, please. We did have some limitations with this trial because of the size of the plots were small, and we had the neighbor effect of plants that were not in the plots growing into them. And so whenever we did our sampling, we had to carefully remove those so that we were only sampling from the vines that were growing in the plots. Next. And there were a number of other species. Many of them were also invasive plants growing in those plots, but that did not appear to be affected by, at least in the number of species, by any of these treatments. So moving forward to 2026, or this year, it looks like the sweet spot for optimal hand weeding, if we have to do one hand weeding, it looks like the first week or two of June will be that time. This is a time of year before the plants are flowering, so we can do the hand weeding and drop the plants. We don't need to worry about disposing of them because they don't have seeds to worry about. And we plan on organizing a group of volunteers to help conduct a mass weeding in some of the openly infested areas at the park. And we'll mark off this area and monitor it after the weeding is done to see if our myelominute occurs afterwards, how much does, and then follow up in the year after that to see if removing these plants and therefore removing a lot of the seed production helps in terms of reducing the seedling emergence the following year. Okay, so that's it on that weed. Next, I'm going to move on to lesser celandine. It's also called fig buttercup. It is in the ranunculus genus and is considered a buttercup. It's a very unusual plant in that it spends most of the year underground out of sight. And there's really 2 months of the year that it's growing above ground. And yet it's managed to become a very invasive plant. Next, please. So the next, like other species in the buttercup family, its foliage is toxic, especially if it's bruised before it's consumed. It's been imported from Europe years ago, mostly as a kind of an imitation of marsh marigold because it looks a lot like that. And there were dozens and dozens of cultivars developed mostly in Holland. And they're still actually being sold, but mostly very little, I believe, at this point because of the invasiveness has been discovered and is well known now. So this is what the plant looks like above ground versus below ground. And here you see where the above ground is a single petiole leaves coming up out of a bulb or a tuber. And then the brown tubers that form, these all form during the course of that very short period of growth above ground. And then they're very light beige color and when they're freshly produced. And then over the course of the season, they will get mature and turn this brown color. So all of these little tubers on the left will give rise to new plants. And this is why it's become such an invasive plant. So here it is in mid-May, and you can see if you've ever seen this plant, you've probably noticed that after the first couple of weeks of May, it starts to yellow and then eventually just disappears. Unfortunately, it doesn't just go away; it just disappears from above ground. And it's a problem in turf, it's a problem in landscapes, and it's a big problem in natural areas as well. It's the poster child really for the unintended consequences of importing non-native plants before they've been evaluated for their invasiveness. Our national landscape is littered with examples of uninformed introductions of invasive species. But one possible way to decrease this in the future might be to quarantine imported plants that are being considered for introduction and grow them long enough and observe them rigorously to see what kind of growth they have. And in this case, if it had been done, the enormous production of tubers would have been observed, and any observant biologist would have said, "Whoa, we can't release this one into the wild." Hopefully. So management options: scout areas in the early spring for new evidence. It flowers almost as soon as the foliage comes up. The yellow flowers are coming up, but it's important to if you have just a very small nascent infestation, map that in any way that you can, either physically with a map or take pictures that you can take, keep track of. So you want to keep track of these small infestations to determine if your management is successful or if it's really getting out of control. In small infestations, small meaning not bigger than a big pie plate, excavation of the roots and tubers is possible. Tarping and cardboard mulch layers don't have a limited potential because the plant really is not above ground that much. So the tarping, which really inhibits the light, doesn't tend to have a huge effect on this particular weed. There are some herbicides too that are registered to manage this weed. And if you're interested in what they are and how to use them, I can give you some information in the chat box or in my email. Okay, weeds that emerge early get a competitive advantage, and that is certainly the case in mugwort. Next, please. Mugwort is also called chrysanthemum weed or mum weed because the leaves, physically bear a large resemblance to garden chrysanthemums, but they do have a very hairy, downy, whitish appearance underneath, which mums do not. That's one way to tell them apart. It's very fast growing in the spring. This growth went from, just emerging in 3 or 4 weeks. It's like 12 to 18 inches tall. Next. This is a huge problem weed in the nursery industry as well as the landscape industry, and homeowner are dealing with it all the time. Most of the reason is that nurseries don't have good ways to manage it or control it. So it will get into the root balls, and then those will get sold and placed into landscapes. Next, please. So years ago, we did a study looking at how quickly this plant can spread. So we planted a single plant and then kept all the plants away from it for 16 weeks and then carefully excavated the soil around the rhizomes. And you can see that that single plant gave rise to all those spaghetti, that giant bowl of spaghetti there. But interestingly, there was almost no new shoots coming up yet. So that 16 weeks was like the period when it was spreading out. And then shortly after that, it would start to, those ends of those rhizomes would start giving rise to new shoots. Next, please. Ways of managing this weed. Mowing is not really a overall effective way because it can, and this is one of the reasons that it's such a problem weed, is that it can survive and even thrive under mowing conditions. But mowing is a way that you can use, it's a method that you can use to suppress it if you want to encourage other nearby plants to grow. And next, please. I'll show some examples of this. So first appearances in March, the best time to manage it in mid to late spring. So by mid to late spring, the shoots that are coming up in the after the winter, that those are pretty much come up, and there won't be a lot more after mid-spring. So if if you try to dig it out or pull it out earlier than that, it'll just give rise to more new shoots. So if you determine to hand pull, then wait until mid to late spring to do that. And also late in the summer is also a time to do that. You can remove small clumps and seedlings, and if you do this, for sure you're going to be disturbing the soil. So I would suggest having a pocket full of native grass seed or forb seed, and every time you pull out a mugwort plant, throw some seed into that hole and then cover it up. So that way, at least it won't give rise, it won't be an open sore in the ground. At least you'll have some native grass seed ready to grow. Um, Next, please. We've seen over the years that it's not really no way to eliminate this plant without total destruction, plowing and disking, etc. So next, please. But there are native plants that do well in terms of growing, growing nearby and maybe even inhibiting the growth of the mugwort. Monarda is one that we've seen, and if you're interested in seeing this in the flesh, then check it out at Halleck State Park Preserve in Jamesport. Their garden in the front area has a lot of these examples of native plants that are doing well in amongst the mugwort. Also, the several species of solidago or goldenrod are very competitive with mugwort. So these are ones that you can consider if you can't get rid of the mugwort, but you want something to grow other than mugwort, then those might be things to plant amongst it. And for the long term, we know that the only thing that really defeats mugwort is shade. So if you have trees or tall shrubs that throw a lot of shade, then mugwort will not be happy with that, and they will tend not to move in. Next, please. This is a deciduous perennial, so it dies completely to the ground every October, November, but it does leave these seed stalks, and the seed is persistent on those stalks all winter long. So, do yourself a favor by in the fall, before you get to that stage, cutting those seed stalks and disposing them properly, not in your compost heap. Okay, garlic mustard. So we have a perennial, and we've had a perennial with the mugwort. We have an annual with the milominate, and the garlic mustard is a biennial. So it germinates in the middle of the summer of one season, produces a small plant, a rosette, and that rosette will survive through the winter, and then the following spring. Next, please. Next. The plant will start to what they call bolt, and then the flowering stalk will emerge and start to grow rapidly. Next. This plant, even though it's not on the surface, it doesn't look very competitive. It can dominate its ecological niche, and that it does so by allelopathy, or chemicals that it gives off that alter the soil chemistry and are do damage to other plants nearby, both natives and other invasives, and keep them from growing nearby. Next, please. So this is what I mean by dominating its environment. It's not very competitive in the sense that it doesn't throw a lot of shade, but there's something going on in the soil that's keeping other plants, natives and other invasives, from germinating and growing. Next, please. So it was first identified in the 1860s on Long Island. It has a multifaceted negative effect on the soil. So even after removal, the soil can take quite a long time for the soil health to recover. And sometimes this the allelopathy is so intense that if you have a big crop of the second year growth, that can throw enough um, allelopathic chemicals onto the soil that would actually inhibit the next year's growth of the garlic mustard. So it's sometimes it's its own enemy. Unfortunately, even though it's edible and some people use it for culinary uses, animals do not really like it, and deer don't eat it much at all. It's seed propagated strictly. It doesn't have any underground rhizomes. And so what researchers have found is that if you leave it alone entirely, that over the course of several years, it will go from monoculture to many other species moving into those areas. And so basically it self-limits and eventually will never entirely go away, but it will certainly become a minor rather than a major element. But if you want to hasten this, if you don't have 10 years or you want to wait, the best way to deal with it is to remove those unripe seed heads. So you have to wait until the seed stalks appear and you have these green pods. And then once those pods are there, that's when you go in and cut the seed stalks and remove them if you can, but keeping them from dropping ripe seed is the whole goal. And then because it's a biennial, once you've done that, it won't resprout if you do it at the right time, and then the plant will just die naturally. Uh, there is a biological control that's been developed and is close to being released. At this point, I don't know much more about it than that, but I think the EPA is close to announcing that it's going to be released. And here you have an example of next there, a time lapse of the flower and seed head of the garlic mustard. So even the early flowers have already given rise to the immature seed pods, and then they will continue on for quite a while. And each of those pods will probably have about 50 seeds or so. So it's a very prolific plant. Okay. Oh, wow. That went faster than I thought. Sorry. I thought it would be over an hour. Um, that means there's plenty of time for questions, if there are any.
So let me see if I can get to the chat. Uh, uh, um, Here we go. So I I do not see any questions in the chat. So I guess if folks have questions, since we don't have a backlog, you can just feel free to unmute yourself and ask them now.
Hi, Andy. Would burning be a way of getting rid of the mile a minute? Would if you burned it off, say like now, if you burned it off now, would it in fact um, not come back up again? And would in fact some of the woody plants that grow underneath, would they survive the fire?
Um, so it's an annual plant, and that means that in the killing frost that happened in November, the plant's completely dead. So the only thing that's left is the few seeds that the birds haven't eaten, and those have dropped to the ground. So you'd have a hard time killing it with the fire. Um, So it's not really a good candidate for that, even when it's growing, because it's so green and lush. It really is not that flammable. I mean, its Achilles heel is the fact that it's very lightly rooted, very easily pulled up. And so that's what, I think that's the way that we have to attack it.
Okay, thank you. And mugwort, if you when they first sprouted and they're starting to come up and they're before they've seeded, if you like I want to say grass whipped them off and sort of gathered it up and disposed of it, would that in fact keep it from it's sort of like mowing but gathering the bits? Would that help?
You mean pulling it out of the ground?
No, cutting it off, not because you said that it
Oh,
doesn't
no, no, mowing it in any way, hand mowing or weed whacking really has very little effect on the control of it. You can suppress it that way if you have like nearby native perennials that, or even woody plants that you want to encourage. So if you continually like mow it, you can suppress it. You won't be able to control it, but it'll allow the desirable plants to grow.
Andy, with the lesser Celandine, uh, have there ever been instances where there's been a very large infestation and it was uh, physically removed from the soil? In other words, almost raking out those tubers, or is physical removal of the tubers a way to, on a large scale, a way to get rid of it?
I did greenhouse work with these plants, and I tried that in the greenhouse. So it was a very controlled environment, and even there, I had a hard time getting all of the tubers out. They're very tiny, and even very very small, and because they're light colored, they can kind of blend in with the soil very easily. So if you were able to, pretty much excavate the area
Mhm.
and replace that or screen it out with a very fine screen. Yeah, that would be a way to do it. And so that's why I mentioned that, because if you have a small, like dinner plate size infestation, that's certainly a viable way to manage it.
Right.
Because if you're basically excavating it down to 6 or 7 or 8 inches, and then that gives you a place to plant something else. So, but you can't really do that if it's a lot larger. So the plus side of this plant is that it's not a weed that we're having to deal with all year long. So come mid-May, it'll pretty much be forgotten. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be going away or that it's not harmful to the native ephemeral species like trilliums. Trilliums just don't stand a chance against this in the native environment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Andy, I have a question. Uh, I can't resist pulling weeds when I see but you make the point that hand pulling is perhaps not always the best. But if one has, a fairly light population of these, if they're few and far between, whether it's mile a minute or mugwort or the lesser celandine, um, or i- is it a bad thing to just hand
No,
pull and
no.
the roots exposed to dry in the sun kind of thing?
I th the only I think that's why I mentioned I mean, it's pretty much a human imperative that we pull out weeds when we see them. But if you have, I know this is hard to do, but if you have some handy native seeds handy that you can put in that area, that really will help in terms of keeping it from coming back.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
in the
but
absence of good native seeds, or like if I'm in a shady area and I don't have seeds for shade, would throwing mulch on top help?
in some cases, but not with mugwort.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, it's really I mean, it doesn't do well in shade, but it doesn't mulch itself doesn't really slow it down that much.
Okay.
Unless it's like a physical, a plastic type mulch that you're talking about. And even there, that's not 100% either.
Hmm.
When I was studying in upstate New York, I had never heard of this weed. And so when I first came down here in 1985, my predecessor, Dr. Bing, took me around to a lot of the cemeteries that he worked with and that were cooperators with him. And they had a huge problem with this because they weren't generally using herbicides to control weeds. And that was my first introduction. And the weed was pretty much confined to that area, those kinds of areas, and you'd see it along the highways as well. But since then, it's become much more of an invasive in all different kinds of growing areas.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I was speaking to someone last summer, and they were saying that the South Fork doesn't quite have the mugwort infestation that the North Fork does. There was one of the I was at KK's. They were one of the herb growers, and they were saying that they don't really have it as much as the North Fork. I was surprised.
Well, they certainly have it in their field nurseries. And so a lot of the people that are buying plants on the North Fork are inadvertently bringing it from the South Fork. But it may not, it's a lot more intensively cultivated areas. And so for that reason, it might not be as evident in, the high end kinds of areas. I mean, one of the problems with it is that it's not susceptible to most herbicides that are being used. But if you're spraying those herbicides often and regularly, then yeah, it won't be a problem.
I was under the impression that it was just in their fields and things. That might have been my impression.
Yeah, no, it's a problem we'd pretty much all along the East Coast.
Andy, I've had my battles with mugwort, and I wanted to second what you said about goldenrod because I found that to be a really effective replacement plant. And so those areas which I have cleared, I have managed to clear pretty significant swaths of my property from mugwort, but it's taken me 10 years of constant work. And goldenrod has been a wonderful companion in terms of, just planting in the goldenrod and leaving it there for 3 or 4 years, just letting it duke it out with whatever's left of the mugwort, and the goldenrod wins. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, there's several examples of that at the Halleck State Park. So if anyone gets a chance to go there, check that out. If you do go, talk to Kevin. He's the manager at that park. He's just a wealth of knowledge. So he's very, very friendly and loves to share information.
Kevin, that's his name?
Yes, Kevin.
Because we're doing a bird walk there on May 8th,
Okay.
Vermont.
What time? What time of day? Like during the day?
8 a.m. Friday, May 8th. Yeah, Friday, May 8th.
Okay. Well, if he's there, pop into the office there and say hi.
And you mentioned, I know Mary Laura had given us a tour of her native gardens in the front there, oh gosh, 3 or 4 years ago, but I'd love for her to show it. Maybe she'll show us them that day as well.
Yes, yeah. She was. We did a project there, looking at superheated water. And I keep getting a feedback here. I guess somebody has to mute. Um, we did a project there a few years ago, and Mary Laura was just starting when we were finishing up that project. So I met her, but I don't know her very well. But I guess she's been doing a lot with that front area.
She loves that garden. Anyway, well, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andy. That was really fascinating.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you all for your patience with me.
Thank you, Andy. That's a phenomenal overview of some of the rogues gallery that we're dealing with this time of year.
You know, I think of people who just like think, oh, we'll get rid of the weeds. We just hire the landscaper. They'll come and spray. You know, weeds all go away. No problem. We'll fix
Well,
it.
I mean, a perfect example of a hand removal of mugwort is the back area behind the red house, where Jeffrey and his workers went through and dug it all out last fall, and it looked perfectly clean. And now, when you look at it, I went yesterday. I was looking at it. The mugwort's all coming back, so we're far from done with that. But it certainly was a big step in the right direction.
And you eat it.
Yes, yeah. Martha
Well,
Stewart has a recipe for mugwort soup.
get some local chefs out here on the North Fork to feature it, like, you know, on their dinner menu July 4th weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, her recipe basically is watercress soup, but you substitute mugwort for watercress.
That's brilliant. Oh, I think that could really catch on. You think of all the chefs out here, they always want to feature local ingredients. There you go.
It's got a very distinctive flavor. It's not for everybody, but I'm not a huge eater of weeds myself.
And it's featured in European herb gardens. You'll see it labeled. It's considered medicinal and it's actually cultivated there. But that's where it's native. So it's not, it doesn't spread. It's really fascinating to me that it doesn't invade the
Yeah,
way it does here. I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject. But yeah, yeah.
yeah, that is an interesting subject, isn't it? Because I mean, England, for instance, has big problems with invasive weeds, and some of them were, we not so happily, but gave them to them, even though, and they've done the same for us.
Partners. Yeah.
I think their biggest invasive weed problem is Japanese knotweed. Much more so than we have even over here.
Yeah, pretty bad.
It's so bad over there that if you have it on your property, you can't get a mortgage or you can't really sell the property until you've got a certificate saying you've got rid of it. So that's a big problem.
I heard we gave poison ivy to Ireland. I heard.
I haven't ever seen it growing in there in Ireland, but I certainly saw a lot of English ivy in Ireland. And I don't know if it's native to Ireland, but it certainly grows there very well.
Well, any other questions from our audience? Okay. So I think it's been recorded. I think it will be posted to our YouTube channel. So if anyone wants to go back and, review what to do once you see these weeds in your yard, it will be available. And thank you very much, Andy. Well worth the wait.
Oh, you're welcome. And please feel free to email me at that email address that I had on the front with any questions.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Margaret and Shayna.
Our pleasure. Bye-bye.